Time moves in one way, memory another. We are that weird species that constructs artifacts intended to counter the natural flow of forgetting.
Every day, in the side processes of your brain, the huge bulk of information gathered from the meticulously vast infrastructure of buildings and their constant metabolism, due to the crowded vistas of the common scapes we traverse, is compressed down to a simple but misshapen hazy gamut of short proportions, covering only a small part of the gray hue, so that it stays on the subconscious of your mind, by not turning into the true amount of information its real shape exudes. But its real shape exists as a vast infrastructure for being a reaction to the processes that made it. And you are such a process. The feedback loops in the humanity integrated system have risen shapes and subshapes of which their own inhabitants often fall oblivious to the hows and whys of their makings, as well as their connectivity to the surrounding organism. Yet these primitive shapes with their props and wires and tubes and functions are cursed with a state of impermanence, due to the macrocosm of our whole circuit far exceeding in productivity than that of us individual macrocosms do in our perspectivity. Their creation has been handed to the virtues of machinery, more than to our own, and hence one day the vista of our cityscapes may be updated faster than memory can keep track. But the mind of machines may deviate their path from ours, and map the networks of concrete, wire, and metal according to patterns that may have become foreign to our own, and thus the architecture of man would decay, leaving a world of shapes stranger to ours, and stranger still the reasons for their design. Now I want you to picture yourself traversing an environment of such architecture that has been expanding in such a way for thousands of years, consuming everything in its wake. Its construction meaning, in a way, the final form of the structures we've been building since ancient times. Man makes maps to raise cities, like old Virgil said. The very thing that makes the finality of the world we live in becomes the most alien thing to ourselves, in our singular perspective. Perhaps you would search for remnants of the old world, places that make sense to your needs as a human. Maybe you'll just try to survive an improv in some weird crevice you found in the endless organism of metal, so you can make it to the semblance of what can be understood by your brain as habitability. Or maybe you would actually search for the meaning behind the odd dimensions and weird shapes that extend farther than the horizon, reading through what the environment tells you, as you regard it as a mutation from a previous world you were familiar with. Some pieces of our pathos may be scattered through the code that makes this place, and knowing that the chances of your encounter with sanity are likely zero, you follow the human instinct of making sense of patterns that surround you, no matter how loose, no matter how large. And with such a mindset, I can begin to tell you why you should read the cyberpunk masterpiece, Blame.
This world extends to approximately the outer edge of the solar system. The layered city is a smaller portion of it, coming up to Jupiter's orbit. Materials for the world come only from the planets. This closely resembles what is called the Dyson sphere. In 1959, the space researcher Freeman Dyson proposed the Dyson sphere theory. He thought that if you take a fixed star, like the Sun, and cover it in a shell, energy that would normally be cast off into space would instead could be used to fuel our world. With circumstances similar to a Dyson sphere, basically the Sun is like a power furnace. It also acts as a nuclear power generator, and one can imagine it being used this way. With only that as power, one can expect to obtain unlimited power for 1,000 million years. Robot voice.
Dyson spheres and ring worlds are tropes in science fiction, based on the possibilities of our reality. A theoretical way we could make better use of our tech and space to give rise to utopic times. This year marks the 20th since Blame was first published, and the 200th of Frankenstein, the original science fiction story. Sci-fi always looked forward whilst being based on the advancements of the present. Their visions to leading to the dangers of technology and how much we can thrive through it. And of course, the resulting conflict between those two. It is interesting how much science fiction has evolved from that early state, of a creature patched up from the bodies of multiple people, rejected by society and having to learn everything that man has done on its own. But then we got our Vernian journeys of man going across the world, conquering its old unity from its full width to its full depth. Soon came the meddling with the possibility of traveling into space, where we conquer the paths of star systems through oddly aerodynamic spaceships, or us being invaded by beings of another world that quickly overpowered us. Then came the dystopias, man torn out of his own freedom due to the systems of power's alternative view of unity. In later decades, this type of stories would clash with each other to create more complex and intricate narratives. However, in the late 60s and early 70s, the first signs of the type of ideas that would lead to something now called a subgenre of sci-fi has started to appear. It's gained its name later with the William Gibson's Burning Chrome. It was named cyberpunk. And though this subgenre is mostly about shorter-term visions of a nearer future, it is somehow, on the grand scheme of things, where we stop taking big leaps in concept. Cyberpunk is as much a present thing as it was 30 years ago, when it comes to storytelling, that is. Since its early predictions of a world governed by electronics and cybernetics ended up being feasible, what evolved mostly was the vocabulary of the genre rather than the invisible threads that saw its structure. It annoys me to some degree that today most cyberpunk works still maintain this short-term mindset. If a zeitgeist was longer than it implies, this would seem like a race to see who's right when the ill-fated 2027s or 2048s come around. And how these other visions seem to call back so often to the 80s aesthetics and particularities to present their own ideas, running against the original intent of science fiction and hinting at either some wide audience pandering or creative bankruptcy. Cyberpunk 2077, for example, looks awesome, but it also looks like every cyberpunk thing I've ever seen, only bumped up to 11. And unfortunately, it is not alone in its fiction, Altered Carbon. Hopefully with this video I can end up proving that this subgenre does not have to be governed by such callbacks to neon light and mohawk dudes with prosthetics arms. Nor to a near future at all, because Blame is cyberpunk as fuck, yet it is none of those things, escaping the hauntological trappings of today's web minds. Time and space are exaggerated. At one time, over 1 million hours pass from a page to another, and in another the main character finds himself in a room the size of Jupiter, and sometimes it's as cramped as the Kowloon City. Killy, our protagonist, might as well be 1,000 years old, due to his unknown past and the outrageously long amount of time it takes to walk across the city, an ever-expanding collection of artificial structures made by the builders. AI constructs went crazy somewhere in the past and keep building it ad infinitum, plaguing the city with random growth. Killy wanders from place to place in search of the next terminal genes. Those remain a mystery for most of the story. What's important about our protagonist is not he himself, but what he carries. His gun is the gravitational beam emitter, and its blast is so powerful that it is essentially the only thing that can pierce through the many layers of the city. Such layers are referred to as the megastructure, a material that nukes can't even scratch. It is also where the title comes from, Blam, instead of Blame. This is more important than what it initially seems, because Blame excels in two things, atmosphere and action. The GBE is the thing that links the two. Blame's atmosphere is dense, crushing, uncaring, and nearly unmatched in immersion. Spaces that go for miles and miles manage to feel claustrophobic. Cramped areas in the midst of nowhere may be both trivial in the big scope of things, yet also contain such things as mutants and paths into a larger and more important area, either physical or digital. What I want to say is that the world of Blame dominates the character, down to the composition of the canvas. Most of the times, characters are just journeying figures with the background easily dominating most pages. Humans are rarely found, and when they are, it seems like they have stayed in a safe place for so long that their physical bodies evolved differently just to match certain conditions. But Killy's gun is the one thing that can dominate the environment. One charged shot suddenly opens paths closed for millennia. You really get the feeling of altering the very architecture of the world sometimes, as every path in Blame is bridges, tubes, stairs, canals that may have been built to go nowhere at all or to circle around with no clear purpose. Only for at the end of it, you find structures that may look close to buildings, but on further inspection, they may not have been built with such functions. There's never any stairs where you need them. As such, a single hole that just goes on may be the best way to reach somewhere. However, Killy only uses his gun when he truly needs it. He often asks human residents to see if there are humans with them who possess the net terminal gene, only to be met with a disappointing negative. But it is a gun, and a character with such a tool, meant normally only for death, would then fight or something, right? Of course. Like I said, Blame succeeds as much in action as it does in atmosphere, and another thing that often connects it is the type of enemies he comes across. Mutant creatures, artificial humanoids, other weird offensive automatons, but most importantly, the Silicon Life and the Safeguards.
In the Blame world, the world is completely besieged by the electric network. Using modern language, one can say it is a complete ubiquitous world. And concerning that higher network, the operating computer's performance resembles a thing of high-speed processing, unlimited capacity, and unlimited size.
Though unfathomably spacious, the world of Blame, in a wide range of spaces, is constantly protected by the Safeguard. They are a program, akin to a firewall, per se. They were created by the administration, an agency who oversees the city, presumably in an outer layer. Since long ago that they stopped being able to interfere with this virus checker of theirs. Using a thing called a structure conversion tower, present in all levels, the Safeguards materialize using the matter on the floor, the walls, the building, varying in size, quantity, strength, and so on. I presume them to be the reason why most vistas of the enormous city are usually empty. They are of American-like anatomy and of quick movement. The author, Tsutomu Nihei, draws scenes of high-speed action with tons of important on-moment details, quite impressively, considering his forte is in the perspective-heavy, grungy and starty background work. The immense contrast of the slow movement through the vast technoscapes, pages on end with no hint of sound effects, with repeated motifs that make the reader almost familiar with the vistas the character will encounter, and with the rapid, out-of-nowhere, attack from a foreign force is definitely one of greatness. It saves itself from being outrageous because enemies like the Safeguard are, in a way, the ground that Killy steps on, and thus danger and place are one in the same. Originally, these Safeguards were meant to be automatically invoked due to humans without the terminal genes trying to connect to the net sphere. What is the net sphere? I'll fill you in on that after presenting the Silicon Life, who are sentient humanoids of cyborg appearance. They are just as dangerous as the Safeguards, but in purpose they are the opposite. If the Safeguards are forced order, then Silicon Life are forced chaos, balance and entropy. Silicon Life are actual characters and Killy runs into them often. Silicon Life wants chaos to reside in the city, and as such, they kill every human they find, in case any of them possesses the net terminal gene, the very thing Killy is after. And they fight the Safeguard as well, sometimes with equal might. There are males and female ones, and they are capable of growing fetuses. As a collective, though they want the chaotic growth of the city to remain for their survival, they also want to see what's in the net sphere. And here's how things get really interesting. Besides the many factions, cyberfauna, mega architecture, cool design stuffs everywhere, fast action of many sorts and amazing art and atmosphere, here comes the biggest mystery of the story, a space so evolved and different that the real world is often referred to as based reality by the administration. The net sphere may indeed be the final form of the internet, permitting infinite escapism, isolation, and connectivity control.
To an average person, a pipe might come across as utilitarian and serve no further purpose apart from its mechanical function. On a metaphorical level in Blame, these pipes are visual representations of blood vessels, or the nerve network one finds in the human body.
With this frame of thought, the net sphere could be the brain, which has nearly ceased to function, and must now be awakened again by any agent the body, or the city and megastructure, can muster. The net's terminal genes was what once permitted humans to make contact with it, possible for them to take control. Not even the administration can control it at such a level. It is hinted at that the human with the NTG connected to the NS may be the one way to stop the chaotic growth done by the many colossal and effective builders. But how did this all come to be? What was the original purpose of it? As humans, we often lack the foresight to see how things came to be as they are, and we rely on pinpointed or specifically picked tension points from a documented past, be it if that means believing in vagueness or even abstraction, leaving the human minds to make theories from patterns of our actuality. The variable here is the obsession of humanity's vision, which can come and result in the most interesting of dualities.
What if we created our own heaven, you know? And because all the bad guys try to sneak into the net sphere, and that's sort of their goal. And the rest of the people outside of the net sphere tries to connect to it as well, but they long lost access to it. So it's almost like we turned ourselves, the planet, our own planet, into hell, and we made our own heaven, which is the net sphere, the internet, connecting to the internet. I don't know.
Believe it or not, this is actually one of the smartest things I've ever heard being said about blame. It is possible that the city itself houses the engines and computers necessary for the net sphere to run. This is even hinted at when a group of scientists try to emulate a human accessing the net in the far past, showing a gargantuan machinery as the subject brain, and still being nowhere the size of the original. What we have done to Earth is the price we pay due to creating heaven, visualized for miles on end. Earth is the hardware, for heaven the software. That is a possible theory, but in the end, the constructs that began from it grew so large that people forgot what Earth even is. Famously quoted by Keely while reading a dusty old book. What's Earth? A piece of paper in this world would have more value than a land of gold, if an economy was even possible. The omnipresent city managed to narrow our sights, rendering us unable to see both our origin and our destiny. The reader is compelled to see what this net sphere looks like. It is incredible that many stories that take place in some sort of virtual super reality don't think much of what would cost the outside world. Or when they do, it's, well, dumb.
By the way, if all of humanity is simply digitalized information, what way is there to determine the boundaries of that information? The first and simplest idea is, since we are living things, then by our genetics? The information on the upper net is probably organized in packets so genes are like keys. That seems reasonable to me. Humans possess such particular DNA in every tiny cell. If you have a method, then such information can be traced. Since everyone's genes vary from person to person, they can be used to establish one's yourself as an entity on the net. Once your specific genetics are set or selected, it contains all the information for your person in one bunch.
And that's why the net terminal genes are necessary. The reasons for there not being a contact with a rare human possessing such genes in the net sphere would be the safeguards, the silicon life, and the sheer size and inhospitability of the city. And of course, even knowledge itself. Memory, whether individual or collective, is also a sub-theme in blame, as nearly all knowledge of the past has been lost. And even cyborgs, capable of living for a really long time, and backing up their personality, they still suffer a loss of self due to quantum noise degradation. Nothing remains still. Chaos is always imminent. All systems on Earth are cycles, always in continuing operation and maintenance. You leave something alone, then it will degrade. With no people to have knowledge of anything before them, it is likely that they won't ever know what the net sphere even is. Though blame lacks words, it certainly can be described for on and on, but I don't necessarily need to introduce you to Dostoevsky, Seneca, the dry bodies, the electric fisherman, bioelectric, the tow-heavy industries, okay, maybe more on that one later, in order to make you feel what the world of the manga has in it, nor to convince you why to read it. But one character that deserves immediate recognition is Sibo, probably the best hacker-type character that I've seen in all of it. She joins Killy on his quest. She has one of my favorite introductions of all time. Here's how it goes. Spoiler if spoilers. Do not want to hear this. Can't skip. Can't skip. Can't skip. Killy just got super done fighting some chemical beast and cyber counterpart after dealing with some scrubs, after dealing with the long trip fighting these spear dudes on a moving ship, and finally he lands on a huge suit. Filled with all sorts of dispos from the above science independent company Bioelectric. Sibo is first seen as his decaying body kept alive only through some questionable tubes, hoping to convince Killy that she's a big deal, the old main scientist of Bioelectric, and that she knows her way around. She promises him the net's terminal genes are located there. So Killy carries her to a storage she guides him to, in order to get a new body. Eventually, Killy ends up in an ambush by all of Bioelectric's defense forces. Sibo has this amazing second introduction with her new body and a whole bunch of intricately hand-drawn machinery that she uses to hack the system to let the GBE deal its final blow. We learn soon after of her origins, trying to get through the mega structure and emulating the Netsphere. Naturally, she joins Kili, like I said. Sibu is the intellectual and practical element that allows the interactions in the story not to be only Kili shooting his way through every problem. She enters time-dilated cyberspace, understanding language matrices, able to comprehend old code. She gets all sorts of gadgets, suits, and even bodies along the way, of which she adapts. Fusing with a safeguard even at one point, Sibu is essentially another needed perspective needed to traverse Blame's endless world. And what a world it is. You could say it's almost like the landscape of the author's mind. Well, up until now I've only said stuff on how it appears to be, in its finalized state. However, to make to the core of what makes this work special, it needs a bit of delving into the author himself.
The art in Knights of Sidonia does seem quite different from your previous work.
Yeah, I wanted the art to have a Tezuka level mass appeal. Laugh. I even considered changing my pen name when I was starting Knights of Sidonia. I wanted the story to be simple, do nothing that would lose the reader.
If you were to look first at the current works created by this author, you would have a vastly different perspective than that of his first fans. Saying he wants challenging himself to see how much black he could fill the pages with in his past comics, he has now chosen a far simpler and lighter style. Now Nihei says he challenges himself to see how much he can leave empty, how much white he can put in. Though his style is by nature obsessive-compulsive, however, it still doesn't feel like when Mobius went from the strong line Baroque ink brushwork of Blueberry to the simpler and clearer lines of his later science fiction and psychedelic drawings. Here, it feels like he was tired of belonging to a denser, bleak world and had to take refuge in one not so dense. Not to speak in metaphor, I'd say he was tired of being on worlds 100% from his head, and moved on to something that would free him from that and also potentially attain mass appeal. Unfortunately, that would also happen to the storytelling itself. One of the most fascinating things about the Niheiverse is how the style has evolved throughout the years, and how the worlds he made seem to be united in this evolution. Blame has begun dark and stark. The one-shot that won the prize in 1995 shows heavy perspective work, but more gesture in values and characters. In the following 3 years, with Nihei working as an assistant and learning the tools of trade, this would change for the better in a big leap. However, strong shadows, heavy detailed perspective, heavy backgrounds, and somewhat stiff characters remained for the beginning chapters. Also, Nihei's primary inspirations were sci-fi novels. Yet, when presenting this world and plots, at first feels like an afterthought. Characters and dialogue are almost non-existent. Why is that? The author has claimed that though he was desperate to find work that he could do alone, he first didn't look at manga as a job, but as a means of self-expression. Everything that is in Blame is all that he wanted to do and all that he could do. This is because Nihei is not an Otomo or a Miura. He said he didn't start drawing manga until his 20s, and his only connection before was reading Shonen Jump in his teenage years. This visual medium just so happened to be his preferred choice. Had the manga and comics industry not boomed in the 90s, he probably would not have this type of an artist career. Prior to this, Nihei had worked as an industrious construction worker and studied architecture. He claims that working so closely to the infrastructure of a building allowed him to draw their structures from in and out without the need for reference. The hallways of Blame became his prose, and that's what I like so much about this comic. It's the mindscape of the author on paper, and that the way it got expressed ties into his immense sphere of depth, obsession with architecture, technological curiosity and anxiety, deep misanthropy and nihilism. The evolution of Nihei's art can probably be roughly summed up in the liberation from the mass to the line, or the liberation of the character from the background.
When there's more line work than dark blacks in the artwork, I'm able to convey more information. For example, if in this particular scene in Blame, it's drawn so dark, you can barely see that there are stairs there. When I paint a lot of black in the background, it looks cool and stylish, but it creates a situation where I am not able to draw as much information and details in the panel.
For example, in the beginning of the story, we see way more big perspective shots and lesser panels with strict character focus. In later volumes, when the author is better at drawing this, we can start feeling the two balancing out more, with a less dosage of sprawling shots of the city and its detail. I'm glad we got both facets here, as it shows two good sides of the author's artistry. It reminds me of one of my other favorite manga, Berserk, a scene where the MC Guts is teaching a sidekick, Isidro, about learning to become a swordsman.
So you think you are going to practice on your own becoming a sword master for years and years, and then you finally get to the battlefield for your first time?
It's definitely not the case here, but Nihei's limitations served as a vehicle for peculiarity. After leaving his previous job, Nihei actually headed to New York and studied in an art university, and when he got back to Japan, almost immediately started to work on his one-shot. Though he had always been a kid who drew, he was incredibly inexperienced, and his head-on plunge into the unknown world of manga is much like our own into his world. When Blame ended, his following works kept showing improvements and changes. Impeccable action scenes in Manga, intricate organic detailed work in Abara, and finer, more spacious and uncompressed vistas and designs in Knights of Sidonia. Aposim seems to be an extension of that, as even Sidonia started with some heavy lines and then went into the lighter notes wielding heavier detail, which still didn't crowd the panel the same way Blame did.
I was making it up as I went along, which is why people say my work is difficult to follow. So after about 10 years of that, I decided to try doing the normal manga for once, change up my art style, try to make as user-friendly a manga as possible. Knights of Sidonia is one of the results of that.
Like I said, part of what appealed me in Blame was the stream of consciousness feel to it, translated into a visualized world. To know that Nihei made it as he went along might be why I'm not so attached to his newer stories, which are plotted in order to ease the audience in. It still is Nihei, and I will come back for the worlds and art, but it is no longer the opaque, thought-provoking bleakness it once was. I accept the changes, but it's less show don't tell and more show but sometimes tell. My whole feeling about this can be probably summed up through this Tarkovsky quote.
I never create allegories, I create my own world. That world does not signify anything unusual. It just exists, it has no other meaning. I think symbol and allegory are of the artist. Creator brings up images which express revealed life the way it is. They are not Aesop's fables. This manner of working would be too primitive not only for the contemporary art but for art of any era. Artistic image possesses an infinity of meanings just like life carries an infinity of meanings. An image changed into a symbol cannot be analyzed. When I create my images I use no symbolism of any kind. I want to create an image, not a symbol. That's why I don't believe in interpretations of supposed meanings of my pictures. Clarity is not most important. The world created by an artist is as complex as the world that surrounds him.
And Nihei now always tries to be more clear. However, even if I'm not a fan of the way he does his current work, I am on his almost subconscious expansion of his previous world through his new one. Before getting into it, I remind you that Tsutomu Nihei works exclusively in science fiction, and within it, it seems that he was especially influenced by the biomechanical. But what is the biomechanical aesthetic? Beyond superficiality, think of the Giger's and the Bekinskis, and Naoki Kato's, who turned organism and machine into one. The cyberpunk union of man and machine is a simple one. Machine does what the organic part of someone or something could not. A pragmatic game of prosthesis in body and mind. One does what the other doesn't. But a quick look at Giger's paintings does not convey this, right? For this biomechanical aesthetic, if it has to be worded, then it's as if flesh and metal are united at the most fundamental microscopic levels, as if the particles that make one another entered into a quantum harmony when united, that what we see is not something that can be disassembled. We do not know where it begins and where it ends. It just is, neither flesh nor machine, but both. The world of Blame lives in a state of approaching this ideal, halfway to the other side. The idea of the netsphere itself could serve as a contrast to the companion smartphones everyone carries. What if instead of dividing the potential of our digital scape into small, limited yet affordable and digestible smaller pieces, we would focus on the large, collective machine that allows people to adapt into its superior space rather than making small machines to adapt to our mundane space? Are we hindering a possible cyber heaven due to capitalistic distribution of goods that are not compatible with scientific advances in all of these fields? The necessary infrastructure and space for its hardware being divided into sleek, thus contrived pieces and sell it in a mass for a profit so we never achieve the potential of this tech? Anyway, this would likely adapt the us that is more overtly physical into becoming more like the digital wonder that could be awaiting us. Give it enough time, and we bleed into it and it bleeds into us. We become the administration or the Silicon Line. But what about the other Nihilisms? What about the Gauntlet or the Toa Ev Industries, the gravitation beam emitter? All these names appear constantly in Nihei's work. Nihei has said that they are not connected, Blame even appearing as fiction in Knights of Sidonia. However, fans didn't take that easily, and it's easy to make connections here and there. Since the timeline in the Nihei-verse is so ambiguous, it's often that people say Biomega could be the distant past, followed by Abara, Blame being possible in the middle, and Sidonia being the final chapter. Put some, take some. but it's the constant usage of this aesthetic that drives us in. It's always a world where nearly everything has been filled by some sort of advanced technology, sometimes techno, sometimes bio, or both. Toha Heavy Industries is always sort of an organization that's dealt with private technologies. The GBE is always a Chekhov's gun that will be pivotal sooner or later. And Ghana are always a shape-shifting biomonstrosity of unknown origins. The narrative negative space allows for such connections and much more that start to garden themselves once you stay enough time with them. They are like a collective gestalt, and each series is a framed peek into it. It seems like the scape of the author's mind cannot be contained in a single story or style, and leaks into one another, even if it was intentional to be formatted for wide audience appeal rather than genuine expression. In the book Blame, Gawken, and so on, Mihei tells us a lot of stories with his sci-fi touch, some of which happen obviously in the world of Blame, but others are ambiguous or downright parodies. In these, you can find the original pilots for Knights of Sidonia, and also weird seemingly post-apocalyptic tale of how the human body evolved in the far future, ending possibly in the most misanthropist story I've ever seen. It is recommended as this book has some stories such as Netsphere, Engineer, and others that deal with the past and the future of the city. Speaking of which, there is a full-on prequel comic called Noise. Its connection is supposed to be more direct. Like everything else made by Nihei at this point, it's mostly ambiguous. I wonder what Blame would look like if Nihei had done it with a more recent, clear approach. But I shouldn't, for such a bad omen produced a mediocre film that would find success in 2017. That's right, this whole thing was to criticize the Blame 2017 movie. Nah, I don't want to get much into it. This movie followed the success of Polygon Studios' other adaptation of the Nihei series, Knights of Sidonia. Both are CG. Thing is, everything looks too clean. This fits Sidonia just fine, but in the grungy world of Blame, it changes the whole atmosphere in a story where atmosphere is the biggest thing. Adding an extremely wide aspect ratio, of which creates an enormous character and background distinction to its most detriment, had a bunch of unnecessary color where it shouldn't be, and twist introductions to characters, main characters' perspectives, and tone down one of the biggest set pieces in the manga, and you get Blame 2017. The soundtrack also feels off, recurring to epic tones, even to choirs in some scenes. However, overall, the big focus on the population of the electric fishermen, the tone, even the amount of dialogue, it all adds up to make this a piece filled with hope for humanity. This is the opposite of what Blame is about. But you could say making a movie or an anime series would never capture the essence of the manga. The connection between character and background leaves the same footing when one is moving and the other one isn't. This is a weird thing to say, as sometimes in movies a sprawling background may dominate the entire scene with figures moving almost as if tiny dots. But the moment you focus on the movement, there is a dissonance due to attention favoring, already limited by the set-on-stone timing of movie scenes. This approach is alien to the world of Blame. In the manga, you focus everything in the panel at once, and then you choose the details you want your eyes to gaze at, since there's not always a character dominance. However, the existence of the underrated early 2000s ONA of Blame serves as a counter-argument not only to this point, but also to the one that says that Blame wouldn't work while fully in color. Experimental is the first thing that comes to mind while watching each small episode, if it can even be called that. Things pan more than they move, and when they do, it's with the most cost-saving and natural timings and perspectives that somehow fits Blame kinda nicely. There are actually a few short chapters in the original manga that are in color, and in vibrant ones at that, and it seems that was the primary inspiration for this anime. Strong blues and reds share the same detailed techno-space as whites and blacks, and it looks better than it sounds. Its minimalist presentation fits the minimalism of storytelling. It's like the weird bits of serial experiments slain in chosen moments of Blame's story. However, overall, it's still very well drawn, with a little more direction, in the plot and a little more budget. This would be the adaptation I would have bet on. It strays away from the original, but in a good way, that, with honesty, tried to see what else could be extracted from the world. And that is a journey for the readers with the original work as well. If you read this work in different points of your life, it is guaranteed you won't have the same experience. In subjective terms, you could probably say that about anything, but due to certain factors and the strange appeal the world of Blame has, it is bound to bring forth some of your own ideas should you try to read it again. Even now, like Akira, Blade Runner, Brazil, or 2001, I can't wait for that Kairos moment again, once enough time passes, that will make me want to delve into its world again, but now with new eyes. And though this is obviously cult material, I also think it's a shame this manga goes off the radar to so many people. In a world where people on the internet seem content to analyze every single thought put into their favorite video game due to some narrative elements being intentionally or unintentionally left vague, it just feels like Blame would fit right in. I legit think there are not enough stupid fan theories being formulated about it. Or maybe because for every 20 of those, there might just be a good one. The ending for Blame. It's often said that it's a loop with the beginning, though I just don't feel that. It's not very Blame. At the same time, people believe the weird sphere thing in Sibo's supposed belly is literally her and Sanakan's child when she says so. Hey people, Sanakan is in administration and Sibo is like in a safeguard body, which belongs to the administration. When she says our child, she could be meaning that it's the brain creation of the so far catatonic administration or something. It's hard to find something to quickly respond to a comment with my own vague interpretation of a vague scene. If you think about it, Blame released the Dark Soul, Bloodborne of manga. And that's when you know when you're running out of
stuff to say. And that's where you know when you're running.
Except I'm not, I just don't know how to say and don't have the time. So
I'll just leave the video saying that you should read Blame because it's original sci-fi in an escape of popular media that's often too obsessed with reimagining the past. Other than some super cryptic naming references to some sci-fi books, you won't find that here. It's mostly original to the core, and so is its presentation. Its world will consume you while you read it, showcasing often some of the best art manga has to offer, at least in this genre. After you're done, you'll possibly crave more like it, and then you won't look twice at that big epic sprawling science fiction fantasy open world game in 4K with 3 billion hours of content, because you're too busy downloading an ISO of the only released in Japan PS1 game Baroque, because it's just a tiny bit similar to Blame's atmosphere and its spirit, and sometimes when you think about it, you know. To Blame fans who are often mostly into manga, I'd recommend Franco-Belgian comics from the like of which spawn in Metal Hurlant. You know the drill, Mobius and Kivilal, Philippe Trurier, Juan Gimenez, though I don't need to say this as most of Blame's readership is European, and likely already knows the names. Though, strangely, the people Nihei work seems to be more popular with is artists, so many take influence from him. Not difficult to find these types if you go on art circles on the web long enough, but sometimes it's to the point you question whether the iRobots robots ripped off the safeguard from Blame. Then you just suppose with Nihei having been commissioned to draw stuff for The Matrix, Wolverine, Halo, and even did the concept art for a Neuromancer film that never came out. Guillermo del Toro said sometimes that he's been fascinated by the world of Blame like no other, and in a world where James Cameron adapts Gundam after nearly 20 years attempting to do so, you just don't know. These Nihalings lie in unexpected places, in unexpected times. That's just to prove how great the source material is. So thanks to Nihei for being such a big influence. Thank you for watching my first video with a, and possibly the only one I care to make from eyebrows slightly raised. Hopefully I convinced you to pick this book up, or not. Hopefully I did. Hopefully you read it right now. And well, hopefully the popularity of books like Homo Deus can like inspire further cyberpunk because it's getting really generic. Okay, good, nice, thanks. Okay, good, nice, thanks.